Welcome, everybody. It's time once again for the next chapter with Charlie Hedges as he explores turning the page on his life and yours. Hey, Charlie.
Hey, Paul. We, several times I say we have sort of a different show, but this is really a different kind of show. Terry and I are going to be doing it together. And a podcaster that I like, Tim Ferriss, that probably many listeners are familiar with, has an annual show that he calls The Random Show. And I think his guest is his friend Kevin Rose. And what they do is they get out a couple of bottles of wine or a bottle of whiskey, and they just chat about whatever comes up. There is no topic, there's no theme, there's no movement or direction. They're just talking about ideas. And I thought, that could be a fun thing to do with Terry. So what I thought we would do today is that we would have a friends chat in an episode that I've thought about calling Just Saying. And although I have a list of things I'd like to talk about, no subject is off limits, and we don't have to talk about what I suggest. Let's see what happens. Now, if you're a frequent listener to the show, then you're familiar with Terry Hershey, who is a very regular speaker. And if you don't know Terry, he is a prolific writer, conference keynote speaker, renowned landscape architect, and spiritual advisor. And I think we will probably dabble in each one of those subjects. So let's bring our special guest. Yo, Hershey, what's up?
Charles, how are you?
I am good. Why are you chuckling?
I'm chuckling because the setup, want to know what I can pour you, the 2 bottles of wine part. See, so we're talking my language there.
I know.
For you, we can't do that, but...
Yeah, you could pour me a $300 bottle of Pinot Noir, and I may... I may break my sobriety.
When you were giving that introduction, I went ahead and poured a glass of dry sherry, which is what I drink for.
See, that's for you sippers. For me, that's just one gulp.
Oh, no. Oh, my Lord. Dry sherry is heaven. It literally, you close your eyes and you think, okay, now I know why heaven exists.
Okay, so here's where I want to start, Terry. I want to start with a bit of sort of dancing around theology. I know you love saying you're not a theologian, but that's a bunch of garbage. You've got a master's degree in theology, and you've got 40 years of influencing literally tens of thousands of Christian women and men. And I think that qualifies you as to have an acute understanding of what I like your theology. It's not doctrinal as much as it is something about the everydayness of our spirituality and how it impacts our life. It's very practical, yet also honoring of the divine. It's a not what you would typically call theologian from the seminary, but it's a theologian of life. Does that define you a bit? Or describe you? I don't like define you. Describe you a bit.
First reaction to that is that I'm smiling because your setup for the show about what we were going to do and talk about describes every dinner you and I have had over the last 40 years.
I know, doesn't it? It did, and that's what I thought about. It would be like dinner, and hopefully we won't have our moments that we both totally enjoy. That I think is a hallmark of a great friendship, and that we can have dinners and have a minimum of 5 minutes of silence, where we don't feel like we have to interject anything. We can just enjoy the dinner, and then a topic will come up. I think that's a sign of a good friendship, that is comfortable with silence with each other, that doesn't have to fill the space with noise.
Yeah, and because I'm thinking about the theology. When I was raised in a religion that required you to have the right answers. That's the irony of theology, to have the right answers. And even when I went to seminary, I had a class, I don't even remember the name of the class, but it was something about, I was going to say it was something about God.
Well, kind of that's what theology is about.
Yeah, but anyway, you ready for this? The final exam, you had to write a paper, literally, proving the existence of God. That was your paper. Not joking. That was your paper. Oh, and you remember Anselm? These are throwbacks for people who remember, people who actually spent their life describing philosophically the existence of God.
Yeah.
They were proving it. They had to prove it.
Yeah. Well, it's that post enlightenment, right brain or left brain Newtonian thinking. Exactly.
And so this teacher had us write a paper to prove the existence of God. And I still own that paper. I mean, in a file, and I pulled it out, and I think to myself, Lord Jesus, have mercy. And then, because my favorite theologian is a man named Robert Capon. And he said, we're so inculcated the flubs that will get us in Dutch. We never hear the music, we only play the right notes.
Yeah. And speaking of playing piano, when he wrote that, yeah.
Exactly. And if you want to know me as a theologian, that's me.
Okay, you know what I want to talk about? Here's what I want to talk about. I just wrote something. I may write a blog about. I have little essays that I write here and there, and sometimes they turn into publish, and most times they don't. But I titled it "The Unbelievable: Belief in the Unbelievable." There's something about the monotheistic well, I'm sure it's all religions, that there is an adherence, a belief, a clinging to things that are unbelievable in the Christian faith. In the Christian faith, we have plenty in the Old Testament, but in the New Testament, we have things like Trinity, and no one can explain it. Try to explain it about a three-leaf clover. That's silly, or an egg. That's silly. There's something mystical and transcendent that's going on between the essence of love between three personas of the Trinity that come out as one. But that's sort of unbelievable. And then we have like God actually becoming a human being and then being killed for it. And then you have virgin birth. And then you have resurrection, where a dead guy gets up and walks and changes the world. Those are pretty, if you go by the Newtonian paradigm in proof and statistics and validity, you cannot prove any of those. All of those are but not just virgin birth, Charlie. Her mom had to be a virgin, so it's virgin mom's birth. It's like, okay. Tell me the answer again. No? Tell me the answer again. Well, I was telling you this because this I've written about theology in my book, in my blog, Sabbath Moment. Right.
I've quoted from this book by a guy named Robert Benson. So I'm trying to explain people. I don't have a quote statement of faith. Because statements of faith are kind of odd to me. Anyway, so this is what Benson, I pulled this up because I want to read this. And he said, he's talking about his Sunday school teacher, Hazelyn McComas. And I'm quoting from him. Kind and gentle woman, a teacher, a woman of prayer, a woman whose spirit bears witness to her having spent a life seeking for glimpses of and listening for whispers of God, then the ancient prayer of the chosen people. She's the Sunday school teacher. There's always a kid in the class who considers it his charge to trap the teacher. Benson remembers one occasion when the teacher was challenged about the veracity of the faith. In other words, all the statements you just made, right?
Yeah, and veracity mean the truthfulness, yeah.
Is this real? Is this really happened? Blah, blah, blah. I remember that she drew a breath and straightened up a bit, as though she wanted to be firm and clear, not harsh and critical, and she said, "This is what I believe. We were with God in the beginning. I do not understand that exactly. We look like we did all day, how we got along, any of it. Then we were sent here. I'm not sure that I understand that very well either. I believe that we are going home to God someday. And what that will be like is as much a mystery to me as any of the rest of it. I believe those things are true, and that what we have here on earth in between the longing for the God that we have known and the God that we are going home to, thus learn to go home."
It's a very experiential kind of faith.
Exactly. It's literally visceral. And,
yes.
And okay, if we're going to get theological, incarnational, very flesh. It's flesh. It's now.
Do you know there's Joseph Campbell, Richard Rohr, Joseph Campbell being the hero, the heroine journey. Richard Rohr, very strong man of faith, but is very right-brained thinking rather than left-brained. And the churches that you and I were... Go ahead.
This whole week has been about trying to describe the Trinity, but keep going, yeah.
Oh, has it? Yeah, Bonaventure is my go-to for understanding the Trinity, and it's all relational. So where was I in Richard Rohr? There are basically two radical camps that I fit somewhere in the middle of, and one camp is the unbelievable, miraculous, do you call virgin birth miracle? I don't know that's miracle, but that's certainly unbelievable, incomprehensible. And there are those that believe that you must embrace the truth of that in order for it to be real. If you can't embrace the truth, then the reality is not so. But if you study the history of faith and you study the history of translation of Scripture, the historicity is really unprovable. You can't prove anything. I may believe in the veracity of something only because I choose to believe it, Terry. I have no data upon, except for what is called Holy Writ, except for the Bible or the Quran or the Hebrew Bible for the Jewish faith, and that is a text in and of itself. There's not a lot of there's commentaries, but there aren't accepted alternative sources. There's only one source, and it explains the truth. I believe in a lot of these things because I choose to believe in them. I choose to believe in the virgin birth. Now, can I? If someone says, "Can you prove that?" I said, "Absolutely not." Wouldn't.
Yeah, but so let me ask you this. So, but believing in it, what's that do for you, your spirit?
My spirit, it accentuates the God that does not have to live in a human box set of required behaviors.
Okay, so it does something to your spirit, having nothing to do with whether or not anyone else needs to believe it or not believe it.
Exactly.
So but that's a big deal. Do you know the number of people who require that to be something everyone believes or not? That's the whole point.
I know.
That's what I like about this, Charlie. Belief is not it's not like a code of theology. Something very personal to your experience and your life.
Very, and that's interesting. You would use the word code because I have just of late in overcoming my past. Part of it is reconstructing my code. My code, once I had a very free and open code. I joined at 30 years old the Christian tradition, and there's stronger codes of things that I don't know that I still buy exactly the code. And Jesus dealt with it. He used the word Sabbath, and then St. Paul uses the word law. I use the word code. And Jesus wrote that humans were not made to serve the code. The code was made to serve humans. And if we take a look at it that way, it's not strict obedience to the code. It's what does the code tell you about the beauty and essence of the divine?
And that's my first response about anything theological, is the paradigm shift. Is what matters here. Does the code itself matter and you're sent to it? Or tell me what it does for you. Because if I say to someone, okay, you believe whatever it is, virgin birth, the deity of Christ, any of those things.
Sure.
Tell me what that does for you. It's on Monday morning. What difference does that make? And you just answered that for me. But the point is, most people go, what? Are you kidding me? I got the answer right. Who cares what it does for me? And then we got an issue.
Yeah, Seth Godin does. I'm reading Seth Godin, and I'm sort of a quasi-fan of Seth Godin. I think he's a pretty wise man. And he has this new book called Song of Significance. And he talks about, what were we just talking about?
Virgin birth.
Theological something, certainty.
Well, never mind what he talks about. I forgot.
No, that's the best part about this kind of conversation is that it was really good until we forgot what it was.
Until we turned 74. I'm calling myself 74. I'm still 2 months away. But
because Joseph Campbell, he's one of my people too. You mentioned him.
Yeah.
And like my favorite Joseph Campbell story is like I forget where he was, but he's talking. I think he was teaching something in Japan. But anyway, there was a Shinto priest, right? And so Campbell says to the Shinto priest, in our religion we have a bunch of lot of ceremonies too, and we have. And so I've been to a lot of your ceremonies, and I've seen a lot of your shrines, but. Then Campbell says, but I don't get your ideology or your theology. So this Japanese priest says to Campbell, we don't have an ideology and we don't have a theology, we dance. Love that. If it doesn't affect personally how I live this day, it's not really of impact.
Or I'm doing a course on Richard Rohr, and I know my listeners have got to be saying, are you reading anybody else besides Richard Rohr? And I'm doing this long course. I'm sort of a guinea pig in a 12-week course that needs to be reduced a lot, but there's so much that I'm getting out of it. It's an excellent course, just kind of long and filled with lots of material. But Richard talks about the influential power of story, and much to the ire of the very conservative Christian wing, the veracity, it's not that it's not important. I'm going to say it's not important, but it doesn't hold it doesn't hold the influence of the power of the story. It is the story. It is not this factual event. Event I can't believe, because that's very post-Enlightenment, age of reasoning thinking. I've got to prove it. I've got to, and how can you prove it when there's only one book? There's no resources other that are going to justify it or verify it or add to it. But it is, I think belief in the unbelievable there's influential power of the story of the resurrection, the story of the virgin birth, the story of the miracle at Cana. So many of these stories are so impacting that they are what keeps us going. It is this right brain, sort of acceptance of the beauty of these stories. Tell me what you think about the great biblical theological influence of stories as opposed to fact.
Oh, well, for starters, story. When you talk story, do you remember for the first miniseries way back in the day, Roots? Do you remember Roots?
Yes, of course.
Yes. Kunta Kinte or whatever it is.
Yes, yes.
Do you remember that every episode of that went through generations, the father sat down with the son and said, what? I need to tell you a story. That's how it began. I need to tell you a story. Which is exactly what Scripture is. It's each one saying, okay, I need to tell you a story. Telling you a story. And the story gets passed on. Because what the story is, it invites you to embrace reality of being a part of this. We're here. We're part of this.
Yes, and it impacts everything we do. And it becomes
because we internalize that.
Yes, it becomes an essential part of our belief system.
Everything. If you take it away from story and simply the creedal kind of element, it's simply somewhere in my head that I simply make a check mark about.
Yeah, I wanted to talk. I'm so with you on check marks. And now I know what Seth Godin said. And this fits right in here. And Seth Godin was talking about formal education of the young, and it's all about giving right answers to the tests, taking notes and following rules. It's not about creative thinking. It's not about dealing with life issues. It's just about being able to answer the test and get the right answers. And okay, so we have education about that, but what it does from 6 years old is it teaches us a paradigm of right answers. And that's what you're rewarded for.
And everything having to do with church, too. And the story I've told for years, my favorite story of the Sunday school class, where the kids are acting up, and they're first graders, and they're acting up. Sunday school teacher's going nuts, and she needs to drink. It's just not a fun thing to do. And so she's shouting at the kids, settle down, and then she says, okay, let's play a game that'll settle you down. I'll describe something to you. Tell me what it is. It's a furry little animal with a big bushy tail, climbs up trees and stores nuts in the winter. And the Sunday school class, nobody says anything. And she says, come on. We're a really good Sunday school class. It's a furry little animal with a big bushy tail, climbs up trees and stores nuts in the winter. The little kid raises his hand, and the teacher says, yeah. And he says, teacher, it sounds like a squirrel to me, but I'm going to say Jesus.
Yeah, and that is the being right.
Exactly. Yeah. In other words, did I get it? Did I get it?
Yeah, Seth tells a story of a 6-year-old that was taught, if they are quiet during class, they get merits and a treat. They get some piece of candy. And she was terrible, could not go to school because she was afraid she would get demerits and wouldn't get a candy because she knew she was going to talk that day.
Right, yeah.
That's terrible. Okay, we're moving on. My transitions are not really adequate, but here's another thing I was reading. Maria Popova in The Marginalia used to be Brain Pickings, and she wrote of a Pulitzer Prize winner, Wolfgang Pauli, who was very close to Carl Jung, and Wolfgang Pauli was a particle physicist, and Wolfgang Pauli had an interest in the meaning of life, but it had to come from a scientific perspective, and Carl Jung had had a meaning of life that came from archetypal sort of his form of psychology or psychiatry. And here in a letter to Carl Jung, here's what Wolfgang Pauli wrote, and I'm quoting. He inferred that meaning, now this is a whole different subject, everybody. We're talking about meaning, and Pauli said to Carl Jung, meaning is not a fundamental function of reality, but an interpretation superimposed by the human observer. So what he's saying is that the physical universe is neutral. There is no meaning to the physical universe. It is just doing what it's supposed to do and advancing and growing and doing all that. But there is no, for the spirit, for the physical universe, there is no meaning. But the meaning, we impose meaning. Meaning is something that is not, according to Pauli, according to a physicist, it is not essential. It is not, an ontological existence in the universe. Now, if we deal in a spiritual world, in another, there, we can easily see meaning. But I like this idea of superimposing, of that we create the meaning of life. And so many of us, and so many people that we know, are trying to discover the meaning of life, when I think a better verb would be to recognize the meaning of your life in the midst of your environment.
Yes, yeah. Got me there. I mean, because anything we have to label and shelve, that this is the point of it, it sometimes just makes me laugh or smile real big. That whenever we say, even if we have, for example, even if you have a relational dynamic, you get together with your son and someone says, what was it? And you say, but what did it mean? In other words, you're thinking, wait a minute. Does a moment of gladness does not carry its own weight? Does not a pang of joy not carry its own weight? Does not a dose of beauty not carry its own weight? Does not smile on the spirit and the soul not carry its own weight? What's wrong with just letting that be? That be.
Yeah, you really are an existentialist, and
I am unbelievably so. And the whole point is, and as soon as I personally have to think, where do I frame this?
Yes.
Oh my God! Settle down, child.
Yes. Because there's an assumption that there is a meaning lying out there waiting for us. And our job on earth is to discover it.
Yeah. And some meaning other than the fact that your heart came alive and your soul was refreshed? Need to name it?
I love that. So,
and you know what? I'm thinking, you know what carries that forward? It's not the fact that I tell you what my theological criteria are for that. It's that when my soul is refreshed, and I tell you the story, we keep telling the story. Just tell the stories.
Yeah, because what is more true than story?
Exactly, the story.
And especially personal story. Even though it's recollected incorrectly, we never remember correctly what the past said, what we did. But there is something that goes to a different part of our brain, rather than our rigidity and that it must fit into some category. It fits into a larger experiential cauldron of which all of these wonders are being stirred together, and we are gaining wisdom and love and life and joy from that.
Yeah, It's a good metaphor, stirred together. It's a cooking metaphor, which I like immensely. That's great.
Yeah, so I think my conclusion on this one, and it's becoming my conclusion on a lot of things, Terry, and that's the distinction between discovery and recognition. That we really don't discover things. Things have been true in our life for our whole life, and at some point in time we recognize it. And we say,
True. Yeah, we see it. Oh, I see that now.
Yeah. It's like, I was not officially a Christian until I was 30 years old. Does that mean God had nothing to do with my life for 29 years? No. That means, for me, it tells me the story that God was involved in my life for 29 years. I just did not respect or not recognize deity. It's just that I didn't discover deity at 30 years old. I recognized that, no shit. This has been going along for forever. This is not a new discovery. This is just a recognition of a truth that has gone on for a long time.
Yeah. That's actually a sermon that I think that would be a great sermon title about anything, something about affirmation of the spiritual in the present, and the sermon title is no shit.
Yeah.
Now you tell me.
Okay, I got more. I got another one that I was reading in Seth Godin's book, the song of significance, and it's a business book, and it's all about teams and what's going on with teams, but believe me, has a lot of life implications in there. And he was talking about this quote that we were just talking about, of meaning being superimposed by some human observer. And then in the midst of it, somehow he was very close with Zig Ziglar. And I think he was a disciple of Zig Ziglar, that the two of them did several gigs together and talked together and worked together. And this is his quote of Zig, so I can't say this is a Zig quote, but this is a Seth Godin quote of Zig Ziglar that says, life will be whatever it will be. I'd like to just stop there, and that we pretend that we are in control of what life is going to be. But, Terry, after 70 years, I know that's not true. I'm in control of nothing. Things just happen, and I follow along and adjust and try to deal with it lovingly and kindly. But he said, here's what Zig said, and this is a very Zig Ziglar quote. So it was, life will be whatever it will be. However, if we approach life positively, it's going to be a whole lot better.
Well, okay. What that speaks to is, because in your comments, that speaks to is life will be what it will be. Yes, I have choices. I have choices about how I live in that life.
Yes.
We talked about being a victim. I can be a victim.
Yes.
No, I would say that's probably not a good choice. Okay.
Agree.
In other words, there are ways that I can choose how I'm going to live with this life. In other words, am I going to be a person that makes this life, embraces others, that includes others? Am I going to be a person who is a victim? Am I going to be a person who feels demeaned and therefore demeans others? In other words, there are choices I can make. Experiences I don't have. Yes, it's going. Things are what they are. So now, in my own skin, what choices do I make with this? Am I okay with making those choices?
I so concur with choice. I know you read my blogs, and so you know that probably at least every third or fourth blog there's something about choice in it. I'm very Viktor Frankl in choice. And you know what had occurred to me as I was thinking of Zig's statement and Seth's statement, that we can't control or predict life, but through our approach, through our choices, we can influence it. We can influence in a direction, but we're never even sure that that's going to happen, because life is going to be what it's going to be. But we can influence our life, and it's not a small disregarded influence. We can have a huge influence, but that is not, there is no guarantee to that. So I like that if we make a good choice and we think about it positively, we think about it with hope, life has a whole different face. If we construct lenses that we can see life through different glasses, then we're a lot better off than we're thinking about it, than if thinking about it in negative and self-abusive, self-flagellation, or judgmental of other people. Anytime somebody does something, we're judging of it. We just chill and accept. Acceptance acceptance in relationship, I think, is a very underemphasized word. To me, it's acceptance in a relationship may be one of the very utmost key factors in that relationship.
Accepting what part, though? What do you mean?
Accepting the other person. Thank you for clarifying. I'm thinking of my wife and I, and that we have there's a couple of issues that we have. We are really
accept. You don't mean accept. You mean actually there's something about embracing rather than accepting. And you're embracing who she is.
I'm embracing who she is, and even though I may disagree with her tactics, I accept those tactics because they're coming from a good place in her. And doesn't mean we don't talk about it, doesn't mean we don't disagree with it, but it is not an ontological disagreement. I'm not saying your character, your nature is flawed. It's just that you have different ideas based on a different history of experience and DNA and all of that. And I must respect and accept that is who you are. And so I am not going to reject you for those positions. I may not agree with them, but it has nothing to do with...
Well, that's the whole thing about any of that, is that, in other words, if you're at home in your own skin, not going to take that personally. That's the whole difference. If you're at home in your own skin, it doesn't tell you who you are, and so therefore, what? That means you get to choose. You get to choose, which is the whole point.
Yeah, and I choose love.
Correct.
And if I choose love, there is an acceptance of the strengths, and I can't even say they're misguided or wrong or anything, because that's all my value system. That's not her value system, and so I have to understand, to accept not just what she does, but her value system as equally as valid as mine. Okay, next question, and this is I really picked one in your sweet zone. I'm curious about this because you are obviously an avid gardener. What about gardening? What is it about gardening that makes it such a fabulous metaphor for life? I know few things that are more of a metaphor for life than gardening. What has gardening taught you? How has gardening, let me ask it this way. How has gardening led you to experience and wallowing in the present with good attitudes?
I wasn't always a garden lover, because I always thought about it as, something, assignment I had to do as a kid, so it was fun. But gardening, for me, so make it a bigger picture, though, Charlie. Let's just talk nature, walking, parks. We talk about this with the emotional well-being of different cities in the United States. A lot of it is predicated on how many parks they have and whether people use them. It's about being in nature. It's a big deal that I have in Orange County, which is why when you talked about going to Laguna Beach, you're talking nature. So all of a sudden, everything shifts. You're in nature. The thing about gardening for me is it really does park me in the present. And and the thing about gardening is it cannot necessarily be a fun present, especially if you look at the weeds and whatever you need to do. But the thing about gardening is all of your senses are alive, and you're simply here in the moment. That feeds you in a way that you did not know was possible. When I was in one of my therapists, I forget, back in the day when I was moving up here and doing my thing, and I said, I was like, tell me why I'm in therapy. He said, because it'll make you a better gardener.
Yeah. And you know what reminds me also of gardening that I think I am personally moved in gardening by the soil. And it's a preparation of the soil, and it's the weeding, and it's the taking care. There's a maintenance factor that is essential in life, because we need to prepare our soil, do we not, in order that we can.
That's a book. A book I almost wrote the title was going to be called "The Dirt Matters," because it's about the dirt. You put your money in the dirt. It's not about the plants, because I make a distinction when I have conversations with people. The distinction between landscaping and gardening. Landscaping is for public opinion, for public viewing. Gardening is what's the expression of your heart and spirit. It's gardening.
I know. Do you remember when you did my house and do you remember the private garden, the secret garden?
Of course I do, yeah.
Yeah, it was so beautiful. I mean, and it was in plain sight, except it was at the far end of one of the gardens, so you couldn't right away see the entrance to it, but there's a tree we made a bench out of, and it was just...
Yeah, well, the key is the bench part. In other words, spend your time there. That's the deal. It's not just something you looked at. It's the create. It's the best.
Yeah. Well, I have more, but I tell you what I wanted to talk about, but I don't think we will. I wanted to talk about wabi-sabi. Are you very interested in that Japanese word?
I don't know. It's not something I know.
It is things imperfect, impermanent, and incomplete.
Right. Oh, right. Yes, I do know. Now I remember it. Yes.
Yeah, and those are that's probably a show unto itself. It's powerful, but I think we will wrap up our just saying with those topics we have covered, and you know what's been fun, Hirsch, is that it's been in a time for you to ponder and explore. I think that it's great for our listeners to see you just to creatively embrace a direction we're going. I mean, you're already always creatively embracing, but this is sort of different. It's not in a lecture format.
Oh, but you know what? That's the thing is, the invitation for anybody to give themselves space to have conversations, because the conversations then in turn take space just for learning, growing, acknowledging, laughing, crying, it's all about that.
And you know what we didn't get into that, just because, some things are appropriate for air and some things are not. But the number of things that we disagree on, I don't know if disagree is the right word, Terry. It's that we just have a different window that we see things from. But that, the beauty of this relationship is that we can talk openly and candidly about that and non-judgmentally. Even though there may be some, I can't believe you believe that shit, but it is, it's a whole different subject, but we need more of that in our country. Is that...
I would argue, let's do a show on that. Need more of that. I agree with you.
Okay, we'll do a show on that.
I agree with you wholeheartedly. 100%, Charles.
All right, my friend. Thank you. Thank you for doing this for me today. I know our listeners super appreciate you on the show. I get fine comments when you're on the show. Thank you for being on with us.
Always a pleasure. Always a pleasure.
Okay, let me thank all our listeners for tuning into the next chapter with Charlie. And until next, this is Charlie Hedges signing off. Bye for now.